in general, there's a lot of conditioning in American society for women, and of course the same thing goes for men. Our idea of who's pretty, yeah, now there's an idea. This lady, she had a beautiful body. I mean, she had a beautiful body, beautiful tits, little tiny waist, perfect round ass, great legs. But the poor thing, she had a face like a potato. It was round, her nose was like a potato, her cheeks were like two potatoes just sort of submerged in her face. Her chin was like a potato. She just was not pretty. There was nothing pretty about her. There was nothing pretty as far as, like, you would never see a picture of her in a magazine being held up as an example or as somebody desirable. And that conditions our ideas of what's pretty and not. We got together and we fucked a few times. It was fun. It was great to look at her body and everything. But it's more fun to look down while you're fucking the lady and see somebody that looked like they stepped out of Playboy than it is to look down and see just rolls and rolls of fat. For a change of pace, I've gotten into it myself once or twice, but we're all stuck with these images in our head to one degree or another. I mean, you can reason your way out of them to some extent. You can moderate them, but you can't totally erase the conditioning of a lifetime. And part of it is that thin people are more fun to fuck than fat people are. If you close your eyes and don't feel anything but what's happening to your dick, there's no way you can tell. No way. As far as the actual physical sensation on my dick, I've had as good or better fucks from ugly girls and fat girls as I have from skinny girls. But when it comes to the visual component of looking down and seeing that you're doing something to somebody beautiful, that adds something to the situation. Like the guy says, the worst I ever had was wonderful. But any little increment you can add to the experience is just that much more. The thing about us guys, and women too to some degree, although guys can change their shape more than women can just because of hormones and so forth, but one of the advantages of being a guy is that you can change your shape and you can make your body look like Superman, and it doesn't take that much time. If you spend an hour and a half a week on your body for 3 or 4 years, the effect will be amazing. You'll be amazed at the difference. That little amount of time, and that little amount of time, an hour and a half a week, will affect the entire remaining hours of the day that you spend alive. That hour and a half colors everything that you do and every way that you relate to other people. It has at least as great an impact as a college education does on the way people relate to you and the way you experience the world and the way you experience life. You enjoy walking down the beach more, for one thing. It's easier. It's not a hassle. You don't run out of breath. You've got a lot more energy. And you can run down the beach and feel the air and feel the wind in ways that you can't when you're skinny. It affects your attitude toward yourself. You can't help but have more self-confidence. You feel less intimidated by other people. Living in the city, there's always the element of violence, being robbed, and so forth. If you look weak and vulnerable, people are more likely to jump on you than if you look like you could give them some trouble. And so you feel more confident walking down the street. You feel more at ease. You're less paranoid. You're less jumpy. And in that way, you increase the beauty of your life and your movement through the world. Notice how casually I tossed in that 3 or 4 years. You only have to do this for an hour and a half a week for 3 or 4 years. There was a time just a few years ago, if you had said to me that I was going to start something now that wouldn't have any effect for a year or so, or not really visually affect for that long, and that I'd be doing it for 3 or 4 years, and in fact that if I wanted to look that way, that I'd have to do it the rest of my life. Because when you stop doing it, what happens is you just get skinny again. Your body only maintains as much muscle as you need to do the things that you make it do. And if you don't make it do anything, it says, well, hey, why should I maintain all this muscle? It's not being used, so it just takes it apart, disassembles it, and you don't have it anymore. If you want to keep on being an animal, you got to keep on living like an animal and working. Oh, this concept of time. I tried a lot of things for a few months. At one time or another, I thought, well, I could be an artist. So I draw for like 2 or 3 months. I do it a lot all the time. And at the end of 3 months, I'm a little better, but nobody is going to buy this stuff, right? And I say, fuck it, I guess I'm not cut out to be an artist. I don't do it anymore. I quit. I don't do it for... Well, I think I'm never going to do it again because it's a waste of time. That's what I thought when I didn't do it, but I have done it more since. The thing is, I was that way about a lot of things. The music, instrument, I was going to play the guitar. Oh, I was going to be a yoga master, this, that, a lot of things. Everybody has tried one thing or another. And you don't get results right away, and you say, fuck it. And that's one thing I learned from pumping iron, that when I saw those first bumps of trapezoids on my shoulders, that was the first time of all that effort that I'd put into it, the first time I'd ever seen anything. And like, this was a year later, right? No, not that long. 3-4 months, I guess, I'd been pumping and hadn't seen any effect at all. Once I saw that it was possible, and I've been doing it ever since. One of the things about doing it is you look at yourself a lot, because once you find out that things do change, you're curious to see how much they change relative to what you're doing and how hard you work. So you're tuned into your body a lot more visually. You look at yourself a lot, and you get to where you can see subtle changes, so that you can see that in a month's time, maybe there's a slight difference here, a slight difference there. Maybe you're working harder on chest or working harder on arms, and you can see in a month's time, you can see that they're just a teeny, eensy-weensy bit bigger. And what it is it's conditioning. I don't know. Behavioral psychology has got a lot going for it. What happens is you learn that these relatively small efforts you make over a long period of time, they don't have effect immediately. You know, it doesn't happen right away. You find that things do happen, and that it's worthwhile. The rewards more than justify the amount of time you put in on them. And I can remember, I guess, this is one of the advantages of age. Up until I was 30, I had a tendency to live my life as if I might at any moment be run over by a truck. And I guess a lot of people have. A lot of people do live that way. The thing is, I sort of woke up one day when I was 30 and realized that I hadn't been run over by a truck. But at the same time, I hadn't at all prepared for not being run over by a truck. I was sort of prepared for being run over by a truck, but I wasn't prepared for what if I didn't. So it occurred to me, well, maybe I'd never really thought about being 30. And I sure as hell never thought about being 40 or 50, but hitting 30 made me think, wow, maybe I will get to be 40 one day. Maybe I will get to be 50. And realizing that where I was going to be when I was 40 or where I was going to be when I was 50 was a product of all the things that I did between now and then. Just like where I was at the age of 30 was the product of all those little false starts I'd made, all the things I'd tried and considered failures. I guess there were things that I spent more time on. And I give you an idea. One of my main ideals that I hold on to is that flexibility is a virtue. I guess it's from being wrong so many times and realizing that the human race has been wrong so many times, like in anything. If you study science or medicine or anything else, the whole history of every discipline is one of believing for years and years and years that such and such is true, and that's the only way it can be. And then finding out that, just quite the opposite. It's exactly the reverse. Or, oh, this friend of mine's in electronics, and hey, he's a friend of mine. He's not, it's not an article I read in Scientific American or anything, but he says for years they taught you in electronics that the electrons go from here to here. There's a direction of flow. And he said after all that time, they finally decided that in actuality the electrons move in the opposite direction. But it doesn't affect the way the circuits work. Make them to work one way, and they in fact work the other way. And whether that's true or false, that kind of a thing has been the story of our sojourn on the planet. Believing one thing is true for years and then finding out that you're wrong. Well, once you accept that as a fact of life, it makes all your beliefs somewhat tenuous. And I mean, I went through a period of anxiety, I guess everybody does in one way or another, but I was brought up as a fundamentalist type Christian. Just before I went to college, college didn't do it to me. I read a book, and it made me ask questions I'd never asked before, and I decided that the idea that our lives were ruled by this patriarchal God was pretty ridiculous. But I still felt a need for some sort of explanation, and the only explanation I had left was unsatisfying. I remember this anthropology professor of mine hinting around that, in fact, everything was a product of chance without so much as saying it. I made a fool of myself. I stood up as a fundamentalist and said, "You mean that there is no reason why we're here? We have no purpose in being here, that we're just here as a product of circumstance, just the way electrons react to protons, and the way they happen to feel comfortable with each other, and all that results in the end in human beings walking around." And he said, yeah, that's pretty much it. And that left me feeling like, wow, well, it's okay, what do I do now? I can't dedicate my life to anything because nothing is based on ultimate truth. Okay, this is something I got from a friend in logic, that anytime you have any kind of argument about the truth of anything, like is there a God, or if there's a God, what kind of a person is he? No matter what kind of discussion you're involved in, if you're using language, you have to begin with certain assumptions about what is true and what's accepted as evidence. Those assumptions aren't based on anything at all except your own predilections. There's nothing you can hang them on to. If you believe that science is real, the way things work, all that is real and stuff, you make certain assumptions about reality that exclude a lot of other things. To give you an idea of how slippery reality is, you know, all those Carlos Castaneda books, one of the main things I got out of them was that the categories that we grow up with, the way that we organize our perceptions of the world, we have words for wind, earth, fire, water, and we look out and we see these things, and we learn to connect this word with this thing that we see. And our words match this thing called reality closely enough that we can put things in our mouth that allow our bodies to continue life, although we're never sure if we're putting the right thing in. Seems like nutrition, there's a really inexact science. So we managed to survive for a few years anyway, based on these words that we apply to reality. To give you an idea about how vaguely actually these words relate to reality is the difference between Western medicine and Oriental medicine as far as acupuncture. Like Western medicine, they have all these words that describe the reality of the body. And they say, if you do this, then this will happen. If you cut this body in a certain way and tie these things off and do this and that, you can actually cut into this body, remove something, and sew the body back up, and it will live. They can manipulate reality, and it works in some cases to some degrees. They can do things and have results that are predictable. Not in every case, of course. And then here you have the Chinese, and they have these things called medians and pressure points, and they apply them to the same reality, the same human bodies anyway, except that these words and these systems that they point to in the body, these medians and pressure points, don't exist in Western medicine. Western medicine doesn't recognize these things as having anything to do with the way that the body works. And at the same time, the Chinese look at the mechanism of the body, and they don't have a lot of the words that the Western medicine does. So our description of the way endocrine glands work and hormones and that kind of thing, they don't have words for those things. And as far as they're concerned, those things aren't involved in the way the body works. So here we have two different symbol systems attached to the same basic reality, if we assume that bodies are all basically the same. We have two different symbol systems that describe how it works, and they can both do things. They both can have results. These days everybody knows things that can be done with acupuncture as far as anesthesia and relief of pain and that sort of thing. Both systems work, but both systems are almost totally separate from each other. They have no necessary connection for the most part, and here of course I'm summarizing things pretty generally, but basically the idea. But the idea, if you can conceive that, then you can imagine that there are all sorts of other systems too, that given a different planet maybe, or an isolated part of this planet, that people might come up with other descriptions of how the body works, and they might be able to get results too. In fact, that is true if you study anthropology. People do brain operations in South America up in the mountains and shit with no anesthesia and all sorts of miraculous things and get results. They describe it differently, and the way they say that it works is different, but you can still manipulate reality with so inapproximate a tool. Okay, the idea is if these things can work, you can imagine there being that many more systems. And in fact, there might be an infinite number of ways of looking at this reality that we describe the way we do. As many different languages as there might be beings in the universe or inhabitable planets, and they all might work. So, your whole idea about the world has a tendency to be pretty tenuous. That can, on the one hand, make you uncomfortable if you grew up expecting hidebound absolutes. I don't know if there's any real way to get used to it. Drugs help. Talking about drugs. Once upon a time, up in Oregon, it was a rainy day, which is pretty common, and I had this big chunk of wood that I was sort of sanding into a coffee table. I'd picked it up in this stream way up in the mountains, and it was a real heroic effort. I had to float and swim with it through these pools and drag it up over cliffs to get it back. It was a real heroic adventure. So now I was polishing off the rough edges to make a coffee table out of it. And I really had nothing else to do that day, and I had this really nice window pane acid. It looks sort of like little plastic sheets that are pressed into tiny pyramids, and each of the four sides of the pyramids was a hit in those days. So I thought, well, I'll just eat one of those little hits of acid, and I'll turn on the stereo, and I'll sand this log all day and listen to music. And so I did. And I'd been going for a couple of hours on the acid. I'm starting to feel pretty good. I'm smoking a joint now and then. And I'm thinking, that feels so good. I think if it was double, I would like it that much better. So I ate another one of those little sides of the triangle. It did for about another hour, 2 hours. It got better and better and better. And we'll talk about what better is, but I finally decided, fuck, this is so good, I think I can eat the whole thing. So I just ate the other two sides all at once. Well, that was fine, and things did get better until about like 8 o'clock at night. And here I'd been inside my apartment. It'd been raining all day long. I'd been sanded, getting high, listening to music. And I'm starting to feel kind of closed in. And I want to get outside. I want to move around. And there's only two things I can do. I can put on full rain gear and walk around in this rain, or I can get in my car and ride around in this shit. And I was just crazy enough to think that I could get in my car and drive the 60 miles to the coast and hang out on the coast and maybe have a couple of drinks in a rustic little bar and mellow out and drive back home. So I get in the car and I head toward the coast, and like this is a curvy 2-lane highway through the mountains, and it's raining, and the windshield wipers are flopping back and forth, and the curves are coming up constantly, and there's cars coming at me with their headlights on, and cars coming up behind me in the rearview mirror with their lights on, and like lights were flashing everywhere, and like the windshield wipers flopping back and forth, and the rain coming down. It was like a lot of stuff seemed like it was going on. It was really active, and the curves are coming up so fast, and the visibility is so poor that I can't anticipate it all. I'm driving based on the 20 yards right in front of me on the highway, which if you're going slow you can handle it, but I've got people pressing me from behind, so I'm trying to keep up a decent pace, and it was like hectic, really hectic. So I made it up about 30 miles, almost up to the top of the pass, and I thought about a lot of bad things. I thought about how easy it would be to go off the side of the road, down the cliff, and just end it all. And part of wanting to get out of the house, part of what was pressing me after spending that day, was it seemed that life was just a total struggle against boredom. Like, I had enough food, I had all the necessary comforts, and the only thing that I really needed was some way to amuse myself. This is partly product of the tenuousness of the world we live in. There's nothing really to fasten on necessarily. Except that I had read this in the art of motorcycle maintenance, and this idea of beauty as a possibility, as a thing that had a kind of a reality, tenuous maybe, and ill-defined and illogical in a way that you couldn't define, but sort of a, what you call, well, perceived in a way other than verbally, sort of felt emotionally, kind of reality, a truth about it. I had nibbled on that. But as I fought this acid in this car through the rain to the coast, it seemed like That day I had spent sort of in the pursuit of beauty, the beauty of music, the beauty of the wood, how it changed under my touch, and of course all the sensations that acid added to both of those things and everything else. But this pursuit of beauty, I guess, it seemed kind of hectic and sort of endless. I was more aware of the idea of escaping boredom than I was the idea of pursuing something positive like beauty. And so I considered not just the possibility of my losing control and driving off the cliff accidentally, but one way to end the struggle against boredom. Just end it all, and it would be so easy. And as it was such a struggle to maintain life, on the other hand. But it would be really easy to embrace death. So I considered it. And I considered, here I was, a lad who'd grown up in the South, and I was living out in Oregon, and something I may get into is the difference in culture. People are different. The things they laugh at, the things they think are humorous, the things they do for fun. The environment, for one thing, is different. Oregon's a lot more woodsy, a lot more trees, and in Florida, where I grew up, it's pretty well developed. Ranches and farms, groves. There are a lot of different things to do to amuse oneself anyway. And that and just the histories of the two places, I'm sure, have a lot to do with the personalities of the people and the things that they think are funny and the way they relate to each other. And anyway, I felt like I was a long way from home, and I was in the middle of divorce, and I felt pretty alone, like here I am in the middle of the rainy woods in the Northwest, 3,000 miles from the people that love me and love everything that I do, accept everything that I do, because that's my family, and that's another story too. So I felt pretty much on my own up there, that not too many people would. Well, I started to think about how people would react if I did die. Imagine them coming to the funeral. Has everybody done that? What they would think. I didn't find much satisfaction in that. It didn't really make me happy. Face it, I was in a bad mood. I mean, I was down. Like Tony says, nothing's any good. That's the way it seemed anyway. But when it came down to it, there was always the possibility, I concluded. If you die, if you drive off the road, it's all over. Yeah, you don't have to worry about being bored anymore. But if you stay alive, there may be some good times ahead. You may have some fun. It may work out. So anyway, I decided 30 miles into the mountains that I wanted to survive. And it was in my best interest to get myself in a safe place as soon as possible. And I realized that I had a blue Valium at home that would mellow out that acid and put me right to sleep. And if I could just get back to that blue Valium, I'd be fine. And I made it. So as tenuous as reality is, one thing you can hang on to is that there are going to be some good times sometimes, and it's more fun than nothing at all. So who is this crazy person here talking that takes these dangerous drugs, acid, and smokes marijuana? There's a lot of debate about what acid does. I have my own ideas about some of the things that happen. I mean, this doesn't describe the whole thing necessarily. Part of what it is going back to these categories that we have and these ways that we perceive the world, organize the world, the input. Part of what acid does, I think, is suspends the screening mechanism. Is that if we had no categories for viewing the world, without categories, there's a lot of theory about what the world is like for a baby and how a baby comes to see the world in an orderly way so that he recognizes mommy and the bottle and so forth. And the idea is sort of that at first the world is pretty much crazy and disorganized, that all these inputs are coming in, just a flood of sensation. You can't relate this to that. Okay, here's a pretty concrete example. People who have been blind since early age or, forever, and have an operation later in life and have sight for the first time. They've done experiments with these people as to how it affects their perception of the world once they do gain sight. One of the things they've done is you put on a table in front of the person a pyramid, a sphere, and a square, and ask them to look at them and tell them the names and say which is which. What happens at first is that looking at them, they can't tell one from the other. They have no way of really deciding which is what, but they know what it feels like. And if they close their eyes or even just use their hands and feel these objects, they can tell you this one is a cube, this one is a sphere, this is a cone or whatever. The theory explaining what's happening here seems to be that they have a way of organizing the sensations that they get through touch in a way that allows them to deal with the world in an orderly and consistent way. But these categories are not connected to any visual input, and so their visual input lacks any organization at all. They get the same information as far as the light that lands on the retina is the same as what lands on yours or mine, except they don't have the filtering mechanisms to separate vertical lines from horizontal lines and diagonal lines, and these are things that they have to acquire. The number of categories that they acquire, and we all acquire, for organizing the world depend on our culture, our language, our background. This goes back to the thing about American and Chinese medicine. If you grow up in America, or used to, if you grew up in America, you could look at a body and never see where a median might be or a pressure point, because you didn't have any words for these things. And Chinese, there's equivalent analogy there. This filtering mechanism that the brain has for organizing the inputs in a systematic way that we can deal with habitually is sort of suspended in varying degrees when you take acid, depending on the dosage and how hard you try to exercise control. To give you an example of this, I was sitting on a hill one time above Reno, Nevada, on the eastern side, looking across the valley at the Sierras. And I was looking at one particular mountain and sort of spacing out. As I sat there spaced out, I realized that this mountain had sort of divided itself up into about 4 or 5 different images, and they were arranged in a circle, as if you had multiple slides of the same mountain, and I showed them all at once in a circle. And when I noticed that it happened, I reflexively condensed the multiple images into one image, and there was the mountain sitting on the other side of the valley, just the way it should be in normal reality. And once I realized that it was possible to see several pictures of the same thing at once, I could recreate that situation with several views of the mountain. I could rotate the circle of images in either direction. I found I could rotate them one way and stop them and rotate them the other way. And realize that the normal perception of the world, the accepted view, is that you only see one view of a mountain at a time, and it stays in a relatively stable position relative to the rest of the world. While that is a convenient and practical way to perceive the world, it's not the only one that the organism is capable of. The kind of images that Castaneda presents in the Don Juan books, once you see that the mind can take any picture just the way you can take a slide out of a drawer and put it in a projector. Your mind can take images, either ones right in front of you or out of your mind, and rearrange them in any way that you want to. But it's a matter of overriding the conventional categories, ways of seeing the world that you grow up with. That's something that acid, I think, does in a way. And another thing that it does is it accentuates certain phenomena that are fairly common in elementary psychology, after images and reverse images. Without any drug to create the after image, in fact, you have to look at one point for, say, a minute until the neurons again get satiated, then look to a blank space and the image will be recreated in reverse. It has to do with just the perception mechanism of the brain. It's a built-in defect, really. If you were trying to design a machine, you'd probably want to eliminate that. The thing is, with acid, it's a lot easier. You don't have to look at the thing for a minute and then look over to the blank wall to get the effect. It seems like it can happen in a couple of seconds. I think one of the main effects of acid is that it does allow a less structured view of the world. Being such an extreme disruption of the ordinary way of seeing the world, once you get back to normal reality and the drug effect wears off,
It makes it a little easier to tolerate the ordinary tenuousness of reality. Another thing it sort of unhinges is your ordinary perception of the importance of things. Sadness, for example. In everyday life, most people have sort of built-in limitations. You only allow yourself to feel so much. Your aunt's baby dies or something, and it's sad, unfair, and everything, but you can't allow yourself to dwell on it because life has to go on and so forth, right? But when you're on acid, sometimes you can dwell on things, and it'll pop up at the most unexpected times, like this woman friend of mine and I have eaten a fair amount of acid together. We're at the beach, and we're sitting there, and we're watching the waves and spacing out. The waves have changed dimensions. Instead of being more or less horizontal and moving toward us across a horizontal plane, you get to see them as being almost as vertical as a set of Venetian blinds, going from the top to the bottom in a vertical plane. And this is sort of different and amusing. So we're looking at this, and it's so beautiful. And one of us says, "Oh, it's so beautiful." And we look at each other and we start to cry. Who knows what we're thinking about? Both of us thinking about different things. I know at one time or another we've talked about what it is we're thinking about. And it's like the wrinkles around our eyes. Like we can see we're getting older. There's something about getting older and age and life coming to an end. And it all suddenly seems so sad. And we cry and cry and cry. And then one or the other of us will say, "Hey, let's change the subject." And so we either talk about something else or we look out at the ocean again and look at the clouds. We're not crying anymore. We're happy. And this happens enough times. Morbid subjects come up and are as easily dismissed as flipping a switch. Just think about something else. You realize when you come down and you're in real life and you're depressed that, sure, whatever it is you're thinking about that's making you depressed, it's as real as the death of your aunt's baby, but the fact that it's real, the fact that it's there, there's no reason that you have to think about it, that you have to be sad about it. And so you can change the subject. You can find something that you can think about, something that you can do that contributes in some way to your happiness, something that makes you happy, something to change the subject, because maybe the reason that you're depressed, the path that the thought followed through your brain was a product of accident, perhaps. You hear a lyric in a song, and maybe you've got a headache, or maybe your blood sugar is low or something, and you hit on this thing. And that's another thing you gotta be tuned into. Sometimes you're just hungry. Maybe you need to have a snack. How to be happy. You can't give good head unless you're happy. It's a pretty complex subject. It takes a long time to find out what it is that makes you happy. The things they tell you in school, things that you see in movies that make the people in the movies happy, the people on TV happy. You grow up thinking, well, if I do the things these people do, I'll be happy too. And you grow up and you do some of these things, and you're still not happy. And you can't understand why, because I mean, Doris Day and Mark Hudson, they were happy. Why aren't I happy? And it's sort of like the old thing of being flexible, of realizing how variable reality is, and the part of reality that makes one person feel good is not going to make everybody else feel good. There's a lot of trial and error involved in finding out what it is that you can do that will make you happy.